Hi, Eric.
Hey there, Jen.
How are you?
Doing pretty good. Doing pretty good. How about
Good.
you?
Good. I'm doing well. Doing well.
Good. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
Well, I'm Eric. She's Jen, and we're here for another episode of Just the Tips. And today, we're going to talk about a question of the week.
Yeah. Question of the week. We started writing down some of the questions that we get on a weekly basis, some of the common questions we get. And this week, we got questions about changing a name or entity type and the impacts that it might have on the insurance policies. But to back up for just 1 second, we're going to make some assumptions here. As was the case with this question this week, that it doesn't include complete overhauls, sale or acquisition, right? So we're talking
Right.
about an
Right.
existing entity that has decided to maybe open up ownership, add or change
Right. Right.
partners, et cetera, and change the name or the entity type.
Right. Yeah, I mean, we can talk for a whole hour session about what happens during a sale or an acquisition or a merger or something like that. Um, there's a lot of things that need to be considered. But even when firms change their entity type more often than not, especially here in New York, we're seeing a lot of firms becoming DPC, so they're changing from whatever they were before, whether it was a PC, PLLC, or in some cases were grandfathered into a non-professional entity, and they're changing to a DPC or whatever the case may be. The first call they usually make is to their attorney, and then they talk to accountants to talk about why they're setting up their entity the way they're setting it up, and that's not really a discussion for us. That's really best left to your accountant to have those discussions with you. But then eventually the conversation comes over to us, and well, what are the insurance impacts? And so it is a question that we get pretty frequently, and so we thought this was a good topic to talk about here on Just the Tips. Our feeling is usually if one person has the question about it, there may be a lot of other people out there that do too.
Yep, for sure.
So that's the point. Anyway, so it's a good question, and it's one that I think a lot of times when we get the call, it's because they're curious about the impact on their professional liability. Number one, the question is, is it going to increase my rates? What do we need to do to make sure that all the entities are covered and there's no gaps or overlap or anything like that? And the good news I'll tell you from that perspective is that it's really not that big of a deal from the insurance side of things. In terms of what we need to do to make sure that everything is in place, it's pretty administrative in nature. The state may have other things to say about the incorporation itself and calling yourself a certain entity and what the rules are. And we're not going to get into all that here, but so I'll start with professional liability. That's the one that we always get the phone call about in the first place. We make sure that whatever entity you are up to the date of the entity type being changed is listed on the policy as that current entity. Um, and then once the changeover takes place, you go from the PC to the DPC or whatever it is, whatever the effective date is of that change is the day that we, change the name on the policy. The first named insured becomes the new entity, becomes the DPC. We make sure that the prior entity stays on the policy as a predecessor firm so that there's always retroactive coverage for that prior entity. And in the cases where there's some overlap, because a firm is going to have to do quite a bit of work when they change their entity to make sure that they're either updating all of the current existing contracts that they have, the things that are going to be ongoing after the effective date of the change. So when that does happen and there is some overlap, we just keep them both on the policy as an active named insured entity, and then make the transition once those contracts are closed out for the prior entity, and the only things they have going on are contracts for the new one. So it's pretty simple from that side of things. Not really too much that we have to do or that we have to be concerned about. But the reason we bring this up today in Just the Tips is because like I said before, the call is always about what do we have to do with the professional liability, but there's a
There are
lot of
other
other
things,
stuff. There's
right?
other things that we have to consider and things that we have to talk about.
So, on the professional liability side of things, one other thing just to keep in mind, and this is kind of in the background, it's kind of on us, but in the event you would ever, a client would ever go to someone else,
How could they?
uh,
How dare they?
how dare they? Understanding that some insurance policies, some professional liability policies automatically include predecessor firms and don't list them out as named. And then some insist upon them being listed or
Mm-hmm.
named. Even the ones that are included automatically on the policy usually look back to the application. So it's really, really important that when that transition happens to being a predecessor firm, that it's listed in the application properly so that it can be accounted for.
Yep.
But like I said, that's something that we would generally take care of or catch when we were going through the renewal process, and no one ever wants to leave us, so not really a big deal.
Shouldn't.
But
I don't see why anybody would.
so so there are other policies though that where it may be impactful depending upon the rules in the state. You may have inclusion or exclusion issues with the workers' compensation, disability, paid family leave. Again, that depends upon the state that you're in and what those rules are. Using New York as an example, if you go from being an LLC where members are automatically excluded to being a PC where executive officers are automatically included, and if there are two or less they can be excluded, right? So now you've got a bit of a variation in coverage that you have to make some decisions on, or understanding that there could be impactful changes if you go from an LLC where you have 7 members who are not included to a PC where there are 7 officers who are now included automatically, 7 owners. You're going to have a jump in premium. So that's something to be aware of. Those same rules apply for disability and paid family leave in New York, but other states are different. So it would be dependent upon where you are and what's going on. Then there are other statutory coverages like auto. So
Mm-hmm.
if you own automobiles, how are they owned? How are they registered? Does the registration and the insurance have to match, right? So there are a couple of little variations there that we need to be aware of. And an issue that I ran into not that long ago was a client, longtime client, changed their name, not their federal ID number, nothing but the name. And their payroll company told them, you can go ahead and keep everything under that old name, just keep paying everybody under that old name, no big deal.
Mm-hmm.
But they didn't let me know that. And the Workers' Compensation Board wasn't happy. So we had to go back many years and add that old named insured back on the policies for workers' compensation so that they would be in compliance for that state.
Right. That's another piece of it that I think gets lost in the shuffle too.
Yeah,
Is are we
the
changing?
payroll.
Yeah, the payroll, and are we creating a new federal employment identification number, and what do we need to do with that, and how does
Yeah.
it get reported going forward? And yeah, it's a big consideration too.
And in this case, what was really surprising was the federal ID number didn't change, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the entity who was making payments and being reported to the state as being in compliance should have been okay, but the work comp board wasn't happy about it. So a couple little nuances, things to be aware of that may need to change. And then there's this form called an ERM 14 from NCCI, which is the Interstate Workers' Compensation Board. And we like to ask for it when there are changes in ownership names because it helps keep things together and it helps give us a better idea of what's going on. So don't be surprised if
Yeah,
you get asked
we're
for
gonna ask
that.
for that regardless of whether or not
Yeah.
the carrier wants it. Usually,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah. We'd like to have it
interesting.
on file. So we may be asking for some forms to be completed. So there are other insurances though too that we have to look at, right? So
Sure. Sometimes the business owns property.
yeah,
Sometimes it owns the building that they're in, or it owns other property, and so those things have to be changed as well. That's something that gets taken care of internally on the firm side, but that's a consideration that they have to make. for it. And
Leasing,
yeah,
if
if
they
there's
lease their
lease agreements
space
that need to
or
be amended. Now, for us, the name on a business owner's policy or property policy, general liability covers, it's, again, just really administrative in nature. We just go in and make the change on the date that you tell us to make the change. But internally on the firm side, there may be some pretty significant work involved in doing that. And we already talked about, the contracts that your professional services agreements that, maybe under the prior name. Again, for a small firm, making a change may not be a big deal, but for the larger firms out there that have hundreds and hundreds of projects going on at any given time and may have closeout on older projects still kind of lingering, and those contracts aren't completely closed for years in a lot of cases. So going back and making sure that those are updated is quite the task in some cases. So.
there could even be existing certificates of insurance that the firm is gathering from other entities, including contractors on projects where they're named as an additional insured, hopefully on the proper forms. But nonetheless, in that process of changing over the contracts, that's another piece of it, a little administrative piece of it that needs to be taken care of, not on our side, but on their side. But there are small pieces of things all over the place that need to be changed. We can certainly help you through that, and we do our best to help guide folks. But yeah, you're right. The question comes in, hey, how do I change this on my professional liability? How do I make sure that the premium doesn't go up and I don't get charged for anything else? And the truth is, it's not really the professional liability, unless you're changing your name to architectural manufacturing and installation. You might
May
have,
change the dynamic a little bit.
yeah. At least we're gonna have to do some explaining.
Right. And that has happened before. Like, no, we're providing the same services as we always have. We're just changing our name to architectural construction company. It doesn't really add up.
But
All right.
okay. So in any event, we are going to have questions. Expect that from us, and as you go through. As you go through the changes, understand that we're doing what we need to do to make sure that you are properly covered
Yep.
in the instances where you need it, and that nothing slips through the cracks.
All right. Well, hey, once again, just a really great Just the Tips.
Just a really
If I do
great
say
one.
so myself. I think this is going very well. So, thanks for joining us. Thanks for listening. Just the Tips with Jenn and Eric. We'll be back next time with some super tips.
Thanks, everybody.